Well, welcome back, guys. You made it back to Leadership Link, a podcast sponsored by the Lytle Center for Faith and Leadership. And we have an exciting topic today. This is one of my favorites. And since we're a faith and leadership center, we kind of have a vested interest in this discussion. So we definitely want to hear your perspectives after you hear this discussion today. So I want to reiterate our vision. The vision for the Lytle Center is that our goal is to transform the workplace by training up leaders of exemplary character. And we kind of define character differently because our character is based on faith. And so we look at 2 Peter 1:5 where Peter says, hey, we should be people of goodness and brotherly kindness and love, wisdom and knowledge, godliness and self-control. And so those are the character traits we're going after. Obviously, today our discussion is getting into wisdom and knowledge. We need to have a reason for why we believe things. And so our question today is about leadership itself. And the question is, are all Christians called to be leaders? So I brought two experts into the studio. And I want to mention we are being safe. We had our masks on, but since we're socially distant right now, we have them off for the video shoot. But to my right, we have a distinguished guest in from Lubbock, Texas today, Dr. Kathy Crockett, who spent 22 years as a business professor at Lubbock Christian University, where she taught a whole host of business courses, but especially management and leadership. She's also an author and has joined us at Leadership Summit many years. So welcome, Kathy Crockett. To my left is Dr. Mark Phillips, longtime ACU professor, a favorite since 2004. He's taught here at ACU and has a background that he may talk about before that as well. He's currently also the director of online programs for the College of Business, which is a very important position, especially now in the climate we're in. So thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
We're going to launch right into this. But I want our audience to know a little bit about you guys. I asked you here because I deeply respect both of you, and you're great parents, not just teachers and scholars. And so I'd love for the viewers to know about you. So Kathy, we'll start with you.
Sure.
Do you want to tell them just a little bit about who you are and your background?
Sure. Again, I'm Kathy Crockett, and I grew up in Lubbock, actually. Went to a little school called New Deal, went off to Texas A&M, so I'm an Aggie. Maybe I should preface that first, that I'm an Aggie before we go too far.
I didn't know that.
Yes. And then came back to Lubbock, married my husband, Steve. He's CFO of a bank in Lubbock. And then my daughters, Callie and Maddie, both are ACU. Callie's an alumni, and Maddie's a junior. And my husband's also an alumni of ACU. So we've been big fans of ACU for a long time. And I just really have enjoyed leadership for most of my life, just the different experiences I've had the privilege to be a part of. I've just always been intrigued by this idea, so I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation and learn.
Excellent. Thank you, Kathy. Mark?
Well, as Dennis said, I've been here practically forever. 04 is not really that far back. But yeah, my wife and I both actually teach here at ACU. We were students way back in the 80s. And left here and did graduate school together for the first time. And then eventually I wound up doing full-time ministry for 10 years. Moved from that back to grad school again and finished up a doctorate, and we came back here in 04. And so she teaches statistics and entrepreneurship and things like that. And I teach primarily management at this point. And as Dennis said, I spent a fair bit of time trying to build an online business program. So we're glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Excellent. So if you look at our culture right now, and especially Christian culture, you see that leadership is a hot topic. So I looked at the available podcasts out there, and it seems like every mega church is doing a podcast on leadership. And over, I was reading a magazine, Relevant Magazine. It says, the call to follow Christ is a call to leadership. And so you kind of have this perspective coming through generally through evangelical Christianity, that all Christians are called to be leaders. Biblical perspective, there are, some indicators at least that there's some positions that require qualifications, which means not everybody can get into those positions. I'm speaking about elders and overseers. James says not many of you should try to be teachers, which in some form or fashion, a teacher is a leader. Hopefully we can go there. So you have some of those ideas as well coming through Scripture. And so I think there's definitely credence to both views. And so, Kathy, I wanted to start with you. Could you make a biblical case, do you think, for a reason why all Christians might be called to be leaders? But actually, we have a definition that we agreed upon first. So I have to tell you the definition. Just so it's a fair playing field, we're going to be working off of a definition from Kouzes and Posner, a book called The Leadership Challenge, where they say leadership is the art of mobilizing others to want to struggle for shared aspirations. And so that's going to be the definition that we're both kind of playing off, or we're all three of us are playing off of today. So back to you, Kathy. What do you think about a biblical case for all Christians being called to leadership?
Well, it's interesting, that definition of the art. It's an art, so there may not be a science. It may not be about title. It may not be about position necessarily. And I think just getting people to struggle for shared aspirations. Well, as Christians, I think our shared aspirations are the gospel and how we can help people and influence people for Christ. And I just think about that verse that says, as you were going, the big call to leadership, as you were going, share this information. And I think, so what does that even mean? It almost to me means, if I want to share this with people and it's an art to help them want to struggle for the shared aspiration of spreading the gospel, perhaps, maybe, it could mean that they are asked, God may be asking us. And the word called is interesting to me, because I think even that word called can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I think for me, I don't want to ever assume or presume what God's thinking or asking us to do. I want to be really careful about that. So when I try to say, would God ask me to do this? Is this something God's asking me to be open to? I think maybe that's where I come from, this idea of called versus it's a command and you have to, or else you're a terrible Christian. So for me, I do think that, especially there, that I think he does ask us to do that. And that may be too broad of a term for leadership. But then there's lots of other characters in the Bible, I think, that have been tapped on the shoulder. So I won't say that God can't do that these days, because I'm sure he certainly can, and I think he does. Yet, so I do think perhaps he might ask us to do that. And are we ready for that?
So Mark, you're coming at this from a different perspective. So what would be a biblical case, in your opinion, for the reason why all Christians might not be called to be leaders?
Sure. It's interesting because, as we talked about before, a lot of this comes down to the definition. And I was trying to remember where are the passages in Scripture that warns about people who love to sit around and argue about definitions. And I thought, okay, let's don't do that. I think that one of the passages that, when I was in ministry and was trying to help our church figure out what we were doing as a group, was Paul's discussion about the body. So he has this really nice discussion. He talks through, the idea that the church body is like a human body. It has parts, it has organs, if you will, and it has different functions that it can carry out. And it's interesting because, you guys know, in practical terms, when you go to church, you see the whole range of people. You see the people who obviously are supposed to be doing this, and you see the people you're like, I'm not sure why they're here. I'm not sure what they can do. And his discussion is very convicting, because he comes right around. He says, you look at these parts of the church body and you're kind of embarrassed by them. And he said, those are the parts that are essential, and you shouldn't look down at them. They play a role. And so I think, for me, when I think of what you mentioned earlier, we tend to think of leadership roles as these particular job titles, or the particular, if we think about what we see where we go to church, I'm going to tend to think of the people that are up on the stage every week, our ministers, our shepherds, and we're all going to say they're leaders. And I think that particular aspect of leadership is harder, to say, yeah, everyone should be doing that. But I think you also have, as we talked about before, this idea that, my role, hopefully, in the world is not just to get myself to this relationship with God, but also to, I've heard people say, my goal is to take as many people with me as I can. And so there's some element there that it's ultimately not just about me, that it's also about the role I'm playing in these other people's lives. And I think in many cases, it's hard to see when you're playing that role in someone's life in the minute, in the moment. You may not know till later. Sometimes they would say, just by the way, when we were in the middle of this, you helped me get through. So I don't disagree with that part at all. I think that's definitely there.
Role clarity comes up so much in leadership because I think it's such a hard thing often when there's conflict. Often it's because there's lack of role clarity. And I think I just listened to Marcus Buckingham recently, and he talked about the different lanes we run in. We all wear different hats at any given moment. I think about college students. They're some of my favorite people because I will watch a college student be a student. They're a student worker, they're a son, they're a daughter, they're a brother. Maybe you're trying to figure out how to be a significant other. So they're also wearing all these hats. And so it's hard. You've got all these different roles you might play. You may also be a mentor to a freshman student. My daughter Maddie, they're having a Bible study at their house now. So they're the juniors trying to mentor the younger students. So that's another role they're playing. Mm-hmm. And I think depending on your role, that has a lot to say of, am I being a leader in that role? And it may not, again, have anything to do with title or power hungry or any of that. It's just in one thing, you really are the leader. You're the TA for this class. You're the leader. You're the leader of the DIG group or this Bible study group. You are the leader. You're the responsible one. You've kind of been asked to take on that responsibility. And then the next day, you're asked to follow. And sometimes in leadership, I feel like we may not even talk about being a good follower. Is really the first rule, number one, of being a good leader is being a good follower. So isn't it interesting, this juxtaposition of, okay, from 1 to 2, I'm a leader, I'm in charge, I'm supposed to kind of have this responsibility and be proactive and take the initiative. And then from 2 to 3, I'm supposed to be the follower. And so that's where it gets, I think, tricky for people, is thinking about, well, if God calls me to be a leader, does that mean I'm supposed to be a leader in everything? Am I supposed to take charge and be the leader and I don't have to follow because I'm a leader? Or does it mean we understand it's a little bit more nuanced than that? And can you navigate that in a nuanced way to understand what is my role in this lane, in this context, in this situation? And I think sometimes that's where it gets kind of confusing because personally, I don't want to feel like I have to be the leader everywhere. And I think that's the wonderful thing you brought up about the church. We can all bring our different gifts and talents. And in different areas, we can maybe even, I don't know about taking turns, but there are times where we lean in and other times where we can lean back. And I think that's an interesting thing to chew on in your life is, what does that mean for me and the roles I play? And is it appropriate for me to be the leader? Is God disappointed in me right now because I'm not leading in this area of my life? But maybe he's not asking you to. So it's such an interesting, intricate conversation that has so many different rabbit trails. But I did appreciate what you said about the different roles that we play.
I'll tell you, so I came kind of with this guilty focused upbringing. My parents are awesome, but the church, and kind of put it in me that no matter what relationship I'm in, if that person's not a Christian, I have to just always be asserting myself, right? Because my goal is to try to dunk them, right? Get them baptized and let's move forward. And so I remember moments in conversations with people where I'd be like, I'm not leading right now. They're the ones who are impacting me. I'm not impacting them. And so it really caused a lot of guilt. And I sense that our students might feel some of this as well. So certainly we want to influence people for the gospel in our social sphere. But is there a time when we sit back and we allow unbelievers or people who are not in the church to influence us in ways?
I read a book called Love Kindness, and last name is Corey. Barry Corey, I believe is his name. And he talks about, as Christians, we want to have firm centers to really know what we believe. So to your point, is it okay to let the outside world influence us? So we have firm centers to know what we believe, what our values are, what we hold to be true. Like, I believe Jesus is real. I believe his promises are true. I believe I'm going to be in heaven with him one day. I believe that. That's my firm center. I believe that Jesus calls us to love. That's my firm center. So he said we have to have firm centers, but he said we need to have soft edges. And traditionally, it seems like maybe we've had that backwards a little bit. We have these real prickly, rough edges, almost as if we're insecure, like, they're going to find out we don't know it all, which we don't, Right. And so wouldn't it be interesting if we could have the posture of, okay, I have a firm center. I can feel secure in what I believe. that I don't have to be afraid maybe to be influenced or ask for outside input, but I'm still influencing in my own way because I have my firm center. They know who I am. They're not threatened by, they may be threatened by who I am, I don't know. But they know who I am, but I still have a soft edge that I can love them. I can be in conversation with them. I can be open to having a conversation with them. But they still know who I am and what I believe, and that's not going to change. So I'm a big fan of the word both and I don't know if that's very appropriate. But I think there's a way that we can be leaders, share the gospel, be the light, yet at the same time, we can allow to be influenced, and I think we can learn. I think of the famous church that went to Disney World to figure out a parking problem, benchmarking. We talk about that in our classes sometimes, right? But I do think, maybe the church doesn't know a lot about social media, but man, wouldn't it be great if we learned a lot about social media for the gospel? I mean, there's just, and social media we know can have a very dark side, so I'm not advocating social media necessarily, but I'm just saying, I hope that we would be open to learning from others and not feel the pressure of, I've got to always just be leading. I hope we will lead with what we believe, but not in a way that's a rough edge that we can't relate to others.
So, Kathy, what would the mindset look like if you go into the workplace thinking, all Christians are called to be a leader and that's who I am? How would you kind of tackle a business career with that mindset?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because I was talking to my husband about this question, and he's CFO of a bank, so he's a very high-level professional. And he is not a front of the room type person. He absolutely is not. He is not power. He is not power hungry. He does not want a bunch of direct reports. He has them obviously because it's his roles. Because he's very good at what he does, and so he's promoted up throughout the company. But he also sees how power can really not be helpful, and when some people become into these formal titles, or they're hungry for the power, or that it's all about I want to be in front of the room and get all the attention, or those are traits that I think, like you said, in capitalistic leadership, assumptions people make, that's what people in their mind picture as a leader. And I think the big thing for me that I just a long time have thought about is even in Jim Collins' Good to Great book years ago, all the research he did, some of the level 5 leaders he found were introverts. They were not this big, huge, charismatic personalities that put on a show in front of people. They'd actually prefer not to be in front of people, having to do all of that. And professionally, my husband prefers not to do that, but he does professionally because he has to. He has to do presentations all the time. But he also is very much a back-of-the-room type leader who has an immense amount of influence for good. He is a light and a very, banking's wonderful. It is our bread and butter, and so I'm very grateful for that industry. But there's also a side of that is very materialistic. It's very much about bonuses and metrics, and his bank just went public, and so it was all about the metrics. So he had to figure out a way, how can I be a leader, drive results? Because if you're in business, you have to make a profit. You have to drive results. It's not like you get a pass on that. You can't just be nice and keep your job. You've got to perform. So how do you balance that? And I think if I was entering the workplace knowing, okay, I'm salt and light, I'm leaven, I want to have influence, I do want to help people struggle for shared aspirations. So how do I do that in a way that is more of a servant leadership idea versus a power-hungry idea? And it's not necessarily about, let me just see who I can crawl over to get to the top of the ladder as fast as I can so I can get paid more and I can have more power, I can tell people what to do, I can control more stuff. It's not really that. What I've noticed is if you can go in and be that influence, if you're in a room and you have an option to have a voice, even if it's intimidating, even if you're young, but you have a voice and a decision's being made that you have a check in your spirit about ethically. Dennis, you do a wonderful job at Summit talking about just because it's legal doesn't mean it's ethical. And that struggle, you've been in those situations where you're in hard situations where you have to decide, am I okay with this? Am I going to speak up and be a leader? Even if I don't have formal authority, even if I don't have a title, can I influence for good in that way? And that may be too big of a stretch of our definition, but I absolutely believe that God is asking us to do that. And it is not an easy place to be. If you think it's going to be all rosy and pretty to be in business and to be that voice in a room that maybe you're the only Christian, it's a hard decision. Do I pay my mortgage or do I speak up? I mean, we've had leaders at Summit who have been in that exact place, and they've talked about how they made that decision. And so I just want to encourage, I think, people in business, be ready. Be ready to know where your boundaries are. Be ready to be a leader. Because what if you are asked to be in a leadership position? And it's scary. I think about Moses. Sometimes I've been in a situation where I argued and wrestled with the Lord over I felt like something he was asking me to step into. And I was like, I'm not your girl. I ain't her. Remember Moses? That's me. You got to bring an Aaron. I ain't her. But he just kept circling it back around, back to this word calling. What does that feel like, look like, smell like? What does that even mean? Well, for me, it meant that this idea, it wasn't like a thunderclap. It wasn't a burning bush. I don't feel like God talks to me audibly. But I did have this check in my spirit about something that did matter to me. And I kept trying to hand it off to other people who had more expertise in it. And the answer was no, no, no. I don't have time for that. No, but it just would not leave me alone. And I don't know if that's what it feels like for other people. It's just something in your belly, something in your spirit that is just not okay with you. This needs to get done. Nobody else seems to have that same sense. That might be the Lord asking you to step into that place. And finally, I think I'm really slow on the uptake, and I finally felt like it dawned on me, oh no, he's asking me to do this. And I was obedient, and it was very difficult, but it was so many blessings came from that. So I think also I just want to encourage you, when you wrestle with this idea, am I called to be a leader? What does it feel like for God to maybe lead me? I hope that's my prayer in my prayer journal every morning. God, you lead me. I tried too long to be the leader in the show, and that was a joke. I mean, he was so patient with me. Aren't we grateful the Lord is patient with us?
Yeah.
Amen to that.
No doubt.
But figure out what that is for you, because we all got to wrestle with this question individually, and we all have different gifts and talents and different ways that that's going to show up in our lives. But take the time to figure it out for yourself. What does that sense feel like? Don't ignore it. You will miss out on so many of the abundant things I think the Lord has for us if you ignore that. But sometimes I think he will ask us to be a leader. He's going to ask us to go to some hard places and help people get from A to B, and it's not going to be easy. But I think he's equipped us. I think he's going before us. And of all the people, I think Christians are the ones that can really lead through so much of the craziness we have right now, because we have a foundation other people don't have. And what an exciting thing to be able to pull from that well that other people don't have to get us through some of this. So it's not like a rah-rah, but I just want to really encourage people to consider that maybe he is asking us to.
And you had a great example with your husband. You were talking about him, and the one that kept coming to mind for me was Tim Cook at Apple. So Apple was Steve Jobs. I mean, forever. Even while he was gone, he was still influencing it. And he comes back, and he is lauded, before his death, as the greatest American technology entrepreneur ever. Not always a nice guy, definitely not always ethical, but and the consensus in the markets when he died and Tim Cook took over the company, Tim Cook is not flashy, he's not exciting, he's not creative, he is about as dull as a white piece of paper. There is no way Tim Cook can run Apple. Well, Apple has grown more under Tim Cook than it did under Steve Jobs, and it was only after Cook was in the job they began figuring out Cook had been running the company. Jobs had been gradually handing the ownership and the running of, not the ownership, but the running of the company off to Tim Cook over the years. And he was this same, I'd just as soon not be up front. I can do my job from back here, and he did. And that's one that the markets literally could not conceptualize. How can a Tim Cook run Apple? Because that doesn't fit the model, the stereotype. And yet, like your husband, did the job great.
My next question was examples that kind of fit with the differing perspectives. And so Tim Cook may be one, but who are some examples where you would say, this person was by no means lauded as a leader, but I would say, wow, what a great Christian person.
It is an anonymous person on YouTube, so that tells you I have no idea who it is.
Yeah.
But I believe it's a Malcolm Gladwell talk. And it's entitled How to Start a Movement, which sounds very much like leadership. And it's this video clip that he's narrating. It's a group of people. They're all out enjoying a sunny day. Most of them are lying around, just relaxing. And off kind of in the middle, there's this one person who has stood up and is dancing.
I think I've seen this.
You've seen it.
Yeah, making a fool of himself. Making
a fool of himself. And Gladwell says, here's what's going on. People are staring at this person like, what's wrong with you? And he said, watch what happens. And one person gets up and starts dancing with them. And once people see two of them, the third one and the fourth one, and pretty soon there's this whole group of people out there dancing, all started by this one person. And Gladwell, if it's Gladwell, he argues the leader in that group was not necessarily the first person. It was the second, because they legitimized what the first one was doing. And when I think in terms of, maybe this is the new research term, follower leadership, I mean, that's kind of what he was, I think, saying is happening there. Until that second person got up and began to follow, no one else was going to even consider it. Once the second person was willing to take the chance to risk looking like a fool with the first person, it opened the door. And so I think, I really challenge my students. We don't talk a lot about followership, but the job of shepherd at church is made infinitely harder because many times we are not good followers. We behave more like customers than like sheep. And so I think the, call to leadership, be a leader. Not call to leadership, be a godly follower. That's hard. Yeah. We don't have any training for that. And yet I'm at the stage of life where going and building this great, huge thing is not for me. But Laura and I talk regularly. Where can we find people that are doing things we think really matters and get in behind them and support them? Be that second follower or the 50th or whatever. Yeah. I think there's room to lead by following as well.
That's an interesting perspective. And the term follower leadership, this could have launched that term into academia
there we go.
Right now, this podcast.
Just what academia needs.
Yeah,
something else
another
to study.
term.
Right.
Yes. So students, the ball's in your court now. You're going to have to discuss this, pray about it, think about what leadership means to you and what God's doing in your life as it relates to leadership or non-leadership, perhaps followership. But I'm so thankful for Kathy, you coming down from Lubbock and being with us and sharing your thoughts today. And thank you, Mark, for coming over into the studio and sharing your perspective as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. Once again, we thank Nick Gonzalez, who's helping behind the scenes, and the Wildcat Ventures Right Hand Media, who's helping us shoot this today. God bless you guys.